Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, to another Founder and Friends. My name is John Daniel Trask. Everybody calls me JD. And today I'm joined by Matthew Richardson. Howdy, Matthew. Welcome.
Hi, JD. Nice to be here.
I feel like you're putting the accent on a little thicker there, so everybody won't know you're also from New Zealand. But welcome. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about mobile development. So we've been working a little bit with Matthew through his role at Velocity Engineering in rebuilding a Xamarin app at the moment to target MAUI. However, you've got experience across the mobile range, and there's so many questions popping up at the moment about which stacks and all of that. So you've sort of seen it all. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, it's been a wild ride. There's been a lot of changes over the past decade of mobile development. I know just before the call we were reminiscing a little bit about the days of WAP and WML, and it's amazing to see how much things have progressed. And obviously, a big catalyst of that has been the availability of the processing power on device as well. So definitely an exciting time to move ahead.
Yeah, it certainly is. I have to say, when the sort of Apple iPhone came out, I was nerdy enough to get an iPhone 1 because it seemed cool. But at the same time, I don't think I fully appreciated how much change was going to come out of the whole just effectively a form factor change, right? Really, we all suddenly moved to PCs in our pockets. So yeah, it's been an amazing ride.
Yeah, absolutely. I think iOS really was a catalyst for, I think, a big shift in mobile development. I think for the first time, having purpose-built, OSs that were able to take advantage of technologies like multi-touch and having the processing power to, really do some great stuff has really enable things to move forward. And then obviously now with Android going into the wider circulation, Apple and Google are really pushing things forward for sure.
Yeah, now we're already very quickly, in my head, I'm sort of thinking, yeah, now we're going to bring AI onto this. So let's rewind the clock a little bit. And so I didn't give you a full opportunity to do an introduction there. From our chats, though, you've come a long way from electrical engineering into software. Tell us a little bit about your role and your pathway into mobile development.
Yeah, I guess probably not the typical path. Probably I had a background in electrical and embedded electronic engineering. So primarily came from a background working in embedded systems. So microprocessors, low power devices, commercial, industrial applications. But obviously that really primes you for being able to develop really lean systems. And of course, when you're developing in very low level languages like C, C++, and even assembler, it really teaches you a lot about the internals of these devices. And obviously we don't experience the same pain now with general mobile development, but the principles still apply. You're working with devices that aren't as powerful as a desktop machine. So really kind of transitioned a lot into that world. Obviously too, there's a big crossover with web, cloud, everything all kind of comes together today. So definitely an exciting space to be working in.
Yeah, the performance side, I have to say for myself is I'd probably describe myself as an optimizer. I like to take something and then make it fast. I actually don't really love getting that first loop going. I like to improve upon it. And that point about the assembly code and things like that, I mean, I know, again, we're very quickly drifting into old man territory here, but I feel like that's a lost art, of digging into that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think, the principles of good software, they transcend whatever language, whatever framework that you choose. So, I think if you can distill a little bit of that lost art and apply it into the modern world, it goes a long way.
Yeah. And we've had such an abundance of performance for a while. So I feel like from about 2005 to probably now, PCs have generally always just felt fast enough. Quite surprised now when you look at a PC and go, oh, that's actually a 8 or 9-year-old computer doing just fine. Which, again, we'll come to AI later, but obviously that's now putting the pressure on things. So what was the very first mobile app you built, and what did you build it?
Yeah, so one of the first mobile app that I worked on actually was back in the days of Novell with MonoTouch. I was working at the time in New Zealand for a SaaS company which was in the automotive and real estate space, and they were looking at being a .NET shop, getting a fast launch to market with an app, and in-house, all of the technologies that were readily available were all Microsoft. So, it was the early days of the Mono project, pre-Xamarin, and it looked like a really interesting and appealing pathway. So definitely was an interesting journey. This was actually pre-Xamarin Form, so this was just MonoTouch, which was wrapping an SDK wrapper natively around Apple initially, and then later on with Android. But it really proved early on that C# and Microsoft could be a player in the mobile world. And obviously, fast forward over a decade, things have moved forward a lot since then.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing how Microsoft sort of navigates that space. I have an old book called The Microsoft Way from about 1995. And it looked at the strategies that Microsoft had undertaken to become as big as they were. And there's a really interesting point in the book, which is it highlights that their strategy was to simply run on everything, whether they owned the platform or not. And that was how the applications business sort of, got everybody really engaged in the Microsoft ecosystem. And of course, once you kind of get to that stage, you slightly tilt the playing field to your platform where things are slightly better and all of that. And I can't help but shake the feeling that, at some point Microsoft has to properly rejoin the mobile revolution. They're definitely not hanging out on the sidelines providing all this awesome stuff for no real reason. So I'm very curious to see what that next generation looks like. But as I've been a long time, who's buying books about Microsoft in 1995? I'm obviously a fan. But my skills are largely in .NET, so I remember playing a little bit with the Mono stuff. Mono develop on the Mac, had that sort of 10 years of wilderness time on a Mac. Yeah. They did really cool stuff. I loved the fact that struck me as genuine innovation that was coming from folks like Miguel and that out of Novell and then the spin out. I do sometimes wonder though about those names, Xamarin, they must be some pretty intense ayahuasca sessions for coming up with company names. But it all worked out. But yeah, so you started there. They obviously then transitioned that into becoming Xamarin. Did that happen while you were actually working on that project, or did that happen to be after?
Yeah, so it happened during the time working on that project. Like initially, the app was targeting iOS only with MonoTouch iOS, and then just not long after the Novell product was acquired, they introduced Android support, which obviously was exciting because Android was a growing ecosystem, obviously following fast in the footsteps of iOS, but I think what also made it difficult in those early days for Android was there was a lot of churn as well in the Android SDK. And I think a lot of that just came from the evolution of the platform. Obviously, it started out, Linux-based, Linux kernel, kind of evolving from there, being actively developed. But Xamarin did a good job in keeping parity with it, and obviously since then it's matured to include good support on both platforms.
I think I remember when they got to that stage where they were almost on the same day announcement, right? Sort of saying the bindings are already here. You can at least start to use this stuff on day one, which was pretty impressive.
Absolutely, which is awesome.
Yeah, and so through this time, there were other frameworks around at the time that were starting to appear. Some of them being, how do we take progressive web apps or really rich JavaScript apps? Did you have a look around at many other options at the time? Like, why did you go that route? Or was it just the Microsoft experience that when you skipped the native approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for that particular organization, they were very Microsoft centric. So it just really was a natural fit for them. At the time, there were starting to come, other technologies like React Native were coming in. But again, like moving to those was a little bit of a shift, for a lot of organizations that already had, maybe they had pre-existing Java code or C# code. So it was a little bit of a stretch. Now later on, definitely on some other projects, looked at some alternatives. But in the end, on those specific projects, just ended up sticking with the actual native development tools at the time.
And way back then, so for my sins, I did build a mobile app. However, I built it on iOS and native Objective-C. I think way back when it was. I don't even think the more modern stuff was even around then, and it was pretty painful. I remember coding with that, and even though we've already talked about it, flashing back to sort of the mid '90s of kind of going, this feels like pretty old school coding. Swift hadn't even been announced or anything like that. So to just set the scene of my personal experience in building on mobile, that was sort of that stage. I didn't get to any of the cool stuff yet. We just support it. So what did you, in terms of that compatibility support, how did you experience that early on? Because I've got some stories to share on this as well, but particularly on the Android side of the world, where there's a bit more diffusion in the actual models, the operating systems. How have you navigated that? And appreciate that over the years, it might be quite different now to what it was in the past.
Absolutely. And again, it's been great to see Google really work on reducing the amount of churn across their native SDKs. Now, it did seem for a while that they were really just trying to find parity in many cases with iOS. And, I think, many people would agree that, from the start, the design of the native APIs in the iOS SDK were excellent. And, there was probably less churn. Again, probably a byproduct of just Apple's long-standing experience, building user interfaces, all the way back to the days of the early Mac and even Next. So, I think it's definitely true that Apple had a little bit of a leg up to begin with, but Google really worked hard to make it a more pleasant and better experience to work with their OS APIs. And one of the key technologies that made this really good with Xamarin later on was Google introduced App Compat, which was their early attempts within Android of providing backward compatibility. And of course, Xamarin were very quick to release bindings for all of those different libraries. And then, of course, a little bit later, in more recent times, Google came out with Android Jetpack, which is kind of their next generation compatibility layer, of course, also for which there are Xamarin libraries and bindings available. So all of that, I think, has helped to shield developers from some of that churn that's happened with the APIs. But definitely in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, like, you've really seen Google stabilize around that set of APIs, and that's definitely made a big difference to mobile developers.
Yeah, the experience we had around this, again, as a vendor to people building, so there isn't a native Raygun app. We get asked maybe once a year for one, but we have tried really hard to make sure that the app will load and present nicely in a web browser on the phone. However, years ago, we were having some feedback from a very, very large customer saying, hey, we're getting these errors coming out of some of our Android devices, and we're really struggling to debug them. Now, we don't normally sit down and actually fix the bugs for our customers. It'd be great at $40 a month. But in this case, you start to ask the question, is this actually the SDK not picking something up? Hey, have we got a bug in here? So we collaborated on looking into this, and we ended up bringing in several sort of fairly deep Android experts to help us diagnose this. And what we found was that, in particular, these devices were all appearing around Southeast Asia. And it was to do with the fact that they would sell very cheap phones, but in order to get the operating system to run effectively, they would have to rip out parts of it. And because Android is open source, they could change default behaviors. And so there were things where we were like, well, the docs say it would literally, X follows Y in this case, and we're not seeing that. And so that became a real sort of noodle scratcher to help them figure out what was going on, and then realizing it was these you'd almost call them hacked, firmware on these devices. It was just
absolutely no interesting. A similar experience. I won't go into detail, but the proliferation of kind of third-party versions and flavors of Android. I know with one particular project, there was even elements of FFmpeg for like MPEG-4 decoding that have been ripped out of the OS, and that were just unexpectedly throwing errors when trying to decode video. And I remember, scratching my head, and the ones who are working with for quite some time on that until we realized it had been removed from the OS. So, but fortunately, those kind of issues now really just seem to be few and far between, which is a relief.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a good thing, but most of the complaints I see these days are directed at the App Store sort of rules rather than necessarily the development experience. It used to feel a bit more 50-50.
Absolutely, and I think early on as well with Xamarin, when Xamarin was wrapping Android, there really was some evolution with getting the interop layer working well between the native Java layer and obviously the managed code and intermediary language compiled from C#. Now, it was interesting. Xamarin, they went through evolutions of the garbage collector in the CLR. Interestingly, at one point it was quite hyperactive, and it would actually start disposing the managed references while the native references were still existing. But again, like all of those kind of issues have really been worked through as Xamarin has matured to the point where you would very rarely experience those kind of issues now in the SDK and runtime itself.
And so that's probably a great point to sort of shift gears and say, well, it sounds like the mobile stack and Xamarin and everything's kind of coming up roses. Sure would suck if that rug was pulled out. So Xamarin's been put to sleep, taken out the back, getting the old yellow treatment. And we've got this new pathway into the land of Maui. And speaking from our experience, it seemed, at least from when we started building out a Maui provider, that there'd been a bit of a find and replace that had gone on within the Xamarin tool stack. So we obviously did retain some of the good stuff that's in there and whatnot. How did you feel at the announcement? How, what's been your outlook from there?
Yeah, again, I think for everyone who had and was working with Xamarin, they were kind of waiting with bated breath just to kind of see where it would go. But I think where it has landed is really positive. Xamarin and Maui, it's a whole ecosystem, and I think that is something that gets glossed over sometimes. When we talk about Xamarin, we're talking about the ecosystem of the tooling, the compilation technologies, and then of course Xamarin forms the UI framework. And similarly with Maui, we're talking about a UI framework, but behind that is all the power of .NET 8, all of the compilation tools that come with that ecosystem. And I think with Maui, that is one of the very compelling reasons for upgrading from a legacy Xamarin app, because with Xamarin, you're constrained to net standard code. Whereas with Maui, you're able to target .NET 8 and, of course, benefit from some of these newer enhancements to the framework. And, of course, within the UI framework itself, there's been a number of performance refinements and changes along the way.
Yeah, the overall stack is really great. I kind of want to deep dive a little bit for a second on what you said there about how Maui can be glossed over as a singular thing. And, we chatted about this a little bit in the lead up to us having this call of, there's also the Blazor side of the world. And, everybody mocks the Megatex for branding and naming. So I don't think this is a Microsoft special here, but, it can be quite difficult to sort of go, okay, so you've got like .NET, and then under .NET, you've got, say, Blazor, and then Blazor's kind of got three things under that. And you come like, boy, this starts to become quite a checkerboard of options at any point. And I do I've personally just found that quite confusing at times when I'm looking at this sort of stuff. So yeah, totally, totally relate to that pain. Are you looking at the Blazor side of the world?
Yeah, again, it's an interesting one. So I haven't worked on it in any production related apps, but it is a compelling alternative. I think it's just looking at Microsoft's approach. They're really positioning themselves to widen their offering to get lots of different entry points.
Yeah.
Obviously, Blazor as a web technology, it's not as highly adopted, for instance, as like React or Angular or Vue. But for those who are immersed in the Microsoft ecosystem, they may already be developing web apps in Blazor. So Blazor Hybrid, being able to run Razor components natively, not requiring WebAssembly, but being able to inject that into a mobile app. It is a compelling use case, particularly if you've already invested in Blazor from a web point of view.
Yeah. The handful of folks that I follow on Twitter that have sort of gone down the Blazor route all seem to be pretty big fans. Again, speaking purely from my personal spot here, is I haven't used it in anger. I usually am a little bit skeptical when something is too tied to a single vendor, and I know Microsoft are trying to broaden it out in general. But those folks that are heavily in the .NET ecosystem seem to be absolutely flying, and I don't know quite cause and effect here, but a lot of the apps where people have adopted it seem to be really beautiful apps. I've been quite impressed with the UIs on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at the end of the day, like Razor is a very powerful, rendering and template engine. I think anyone who's worked with Razor from the days of ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core, they can testify to its flexibility. So again, it's just another tool to have kind of in the toolkit when it comes to working with MAUI. Not necessarily to go all in, but just to have it as another tool.
And until we can bring native web forms to the mobile experience, get some view state in there. No, that's super interesting. And one of the challenges we run into at Raygun is that we obviously build SDKs to do either RAM or crash reporting across these things. And I got to be honest, I'm starting to lose count. We've kind of got native iOS, we've got Xamarin, we've got React Native, as you said. There's a Flutter SDK we've got. This list is getting pretty long. I think it probably is that hat tip to the fact that for most people now, this is their computer. But should you just base it on what's my existing skill set? Is there any time where you would have picked a different tech stack for a different type of app, perhaps? Or how would you suggest people think about the technology choice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing is to not be dogmatic. I mean, obviously, yes, there will be engineers and developers and teams that have experience in a pre-existing technology, but just because you've already invested in that technology, it shouldn't be the only reason to continue with whatever the newest evolution of it is. Just going back to Xamarin, that was one of probably the interesting inflection points when it came to building an app. Was even Microsoft said this early on. They sort of said, hey, if you're building like a line of business app, something that is dealing in user input is kind of fairly form based, hence the name Xamarin Forms, have we got the tool for you? But hey, if you want to have more low-level access to the underlying, layout engine of iOS and Android, then go with Xamarin Native. And, again, I think taking that reasoning, looking at what app you're building, is a really good indicator of what technology to use. I know we'll probably touch on it a little bit later, but even in the .NET world, obviously, people moving from Xamarin today, MAUI isn't the only option. You've got the likes of Avalonia, Uno. Of course, we've discussed Blazor Hybrid, but all of these play to different strengths. And I think a big part of it is really just settling on what is the best technology for your product and for your team.
Yeah, I'd like to give a special call out on that one. Through COVID, I was encouraged to try and daily drive Linux, and really enjoyed that. But obviously, being a .NET dev, I kind of felt like some of my superpowers had been curtailed on the UI front. So I tried out the Avalonia stuff. And for those that don't know, a million years ago, we actually did sell WPF components, Silverlight components, things like that. So we know the Microsoft UI stacks pretty well. But I was really, really impressed actually with the Avalonia stack, both how easy it was to get started, how straightforward it was to build that cross-platform. Obviously now building on the shoulders of .NET, obviously being cross-platform too. And so I think what they're doing is really cool. I am seeing a lot of this Uno platform coming up and often connected to multiple things. So, maybe it's the line in that movie, explain to me like a child or a golden retriever. How does this all fit together?
Yeah, and again, and I think that, just kind of going back to the theme of our discussion, it is a very exciting time in mobile development, and it's a time where there are a lot of emerging technologies and tools, not just in the Microsoft world, but beyond as well, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But, really with Avalonia and Uno, both of them can run on the .NET 8 stack, which is great. So again, if you're an organization who's currently in the position of migrating from Xamarin to MAUI, really you're also migrating from Xamarin SDK tooling to modern .NET 8, and being on that modern platform obviously opens you up to work with Avalonia, to work with Uno and MAUI. So you've got a lot of opportunities. Now, Avalonia and Uno play to different strengths. Interestingly, Avalonia is more of, you could say, a Flutter-like experience. It's based really around the concept of rendering out a 2D render, kind of pixel perfect render of cross-platform controls. So as you mentioned, it was heavily inspired by WPF. It's free and open source. Now, interestingly, MAUI can host Avalonia views. So for some teams who are interested in dabbling with it, maybe they've already done or they've got a migration to MAUI in progress and they just want to try out Avalonia, that is something to look at. I think it's called Avalonia MAUI Hybrid, and it's an embedding technology. So definitely something to look at. Uno, on the other hand, the premise of Uno is not to render pixel perfect on every platform. It really is an attempt to render near pixel perfect, but still utilize aspects of the native controls. So it is going to produce a UI that's probably a little bit closer to the likes of Xamarin Forms and MAUI, whereas Avalonia, being more like Google Flutter, is really just about presenting a unified rendered UI, completely platform agnostic. So it's interesting, there was recently a case study. Uno published a case study of Toyota International had an app they used in their production and manufacturing plant that was Xamarin Forms. Now, they migrated it to .NET 8 and actually went to the Uno platform. And there's quite an interesting write-up on the blog about that as well. But again, just looking at it through the lens of picking the right technology for the product.
One of the reasons that folks sometimes pick the Microsoft-related technologies is obviously massive brand, huge support, massive communities, all of that good stuff. I'm not suggesting that Uno and Avalonia don't have communities and things. They do. I see that around that. But tell me a little bit more about them, I guess, from an organizational standpoint. Like if you were trying to pitch this, say to maybe a non-technical leader in an organization, and you're trying to obviously sell them on the idea that this is a stable platform and a thing to use. What is the background behind those? Are they just community projects? Are they commercial? What are the options for folks if they did want to explore them?
Yeah, so obviously with Avalonia, Avalonia is free and open source. But I think one thing that Avalonia and Uno do share is they have been commercialized to the point where there is the possibility of getting like SLA level support with them. And I think for for developers who are transitioning to those platforms, really that's needed, a form of guidance, kind of like expertise to really make it a convincing business case. But obviously that is an appealing aspect and can be something that could give a team some more confidence, for instance, working on migrating to these platforms, knowing you're going to get the support of an Avalonia engineer, an Uno engineer who's going to come to your aid and be able to help you. But obviously you are going to pay for the privilege of that. Whereas with MAUI being, entirely open source project driven by Microsoft, you're not going to have that same level of SLA, but at the same time, you're benefiting from two things. Number one, a very, very active community and regular release cadence of .NET 8, soon to be .NET 9 in preview. But also the fact that it's now been broken down into packages where if you have a breaking issue that's, for instance, affecting your app commercially, you can pull it down. You can run a build. You could set up your own build pipeline, patch it, generate a NuGet package. So you're not boxed in. And I think that's a good thing to remember as well.
So, Matthew, you've been wildly diplomatic in all of your views here. So let me ask you the challenging question. Which technology should folks not touch with a 10-foot barge pole on mobile? Is there anything we should avoid?
That's a loaded question, JD.
Are there any though that just sort of go, "Oh, there be drag"? Like, let me reframe it, maybe slightly less inflammatory. If I was going to go and build a mobile app today, my first protocol, to be honest, would be, why wouldn't I kind of go down the native thing? Is the native stuff got some issues, some challenges, the dragons, the complexity, all of that sort of stuff? What actually did give rise to the 50 other opportunities? Does it suggest I shouldn't be on native ever?
Absolutely. No, great questions. And I think that's a good thing to lose sight of. We're talking about a lot of cross-platform technologies here, particularly in the Microsoft space, but obviously we mentioned Flutter, which is available for iOS, Android, and Win32. But talking about native, native development has really moved ahead as well on iOS and Android now, primarily driven by a shift in the way mobile apps are built, and that real paradigm shift has been driven by functional programming, and it really has led to the evolution of I think what the industry are determining declarative UI frameworks. So frameworks where you can fluently compose a user interface and then make it stateful. Yep. So you're delivering data to it asynchronously that's being able to bind to elements of the UI. Now Apple and Google are doing a good job at doing this first class. So obviously with Apple, we mentioned Swift, but Swift UI is one of those UI frameworks that is really moving ahead heavily at the moment. Now, Google are obviously following closely behind, probably in parity with it now, with Compose, Jetpack Compose. So Compose is in many ways very, very similar to Swift. It's a declarative framework. It's powered with modern stateful language features. You've got functional reactive programming built into it. On iOS, you've got technologies like Combine, which is very similar to system reactive with .NET. With Android, you've got streams and flows, coroutines. So it is interesting. A lot of these paradigms that have been evolving in C# have also simultaneously been evolving as well in these native languages. Now, interestingly, from the Android point of view, with Compose, that is also tightly linked with another cross-platform technology, which is Kotlin multi-platform, which is a Google technology for code sharing between iOS and Android. Now, interestingly, more recently, they've extended that to include another product in their portfolio called Compose multi-platform. And that is able to take some of these new UI technologies and then apply them to both iOS and Android. So I think that the takeaway from all of this is the lines are constantly blurring. And
Yeah.
as a developer, you're just getting more and more good tools in your arsenal, really. And it's just a matter of picking the right one.
Yeah, that is interesting. The because I was looking a lot closer at this stuff when Microsoft was gearing up to possibly, sorry, this is a bit of a shift, but when they were looking at having the Android support in Windows 11, which I could be wrong, but I think they quietly cancelled that plan a couple of months back. But I was super curious to see where that was going, because I thought if that actually sort of comes to pass, and Apple actually figures out how to sort of have a one platform play, I think those lines between what is a mobile and a PC app, they disappear, right? And that's a really interesting thing to consider down the road. Shifting gears, I guess, slightly to actual delivery of the code. So we've talked a bit about technology. I've tried to bait you into nerd sniping on something. Failed there. No. Let's talk about the team structures. So in Velocity Engineering, as I understand it, you've helped deliver a range of mobile applications over the years across different technologies and things like that. I know our audience listening to this are probably all hardcore mobile developers, so let's think about the team structures. If you've kind of got a cross-platform framework, should you just have the one team? Is it better to still have some folks specialized saying, well, I'm going to make sure that the Android experience here is great, and I'm going to make sure the iOS one's great? What are some of the things the do's and don'ts you've sort of gained over the years, and how to think about the team delivery side of getting this done?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, it does boil down to the fact that you are dealing with very unique and specific platforms. So as much as all of these cross-platform tools, whether you're running in the Microsoft world or you're running in the Google world, Kotlin world, Swift world, they really do require knowledge of the underlying platforms. Now, if you're working on, simple apps, maybe, relatively simple UIs and behavior, you can almost get away with having your head in the sand a little bit more. But, I think most teams who have, for instance, gone down the Xamarin path, historically, they've been happily working away, and then maybe there's been an update to the framework, or they're trying to implement a new feature. And then they hit across something where they're actually dealing with a native issue. So I think the benefit of stacking teams with a good cross section of, if you're working in the Microsoft stack, obviously it's a framework that's very open to general .NET developers. So, if you've got, business logic, data access, services layer code, unit tests, all of that, you can literally pull someone out of the general .NET world and put them straight in there, and they're going to be happy as a clam working away. But at the same time, having those subject matter experts on the team is important. Maybe you won't use them all the time, but you will eventually need them. And obviously, for myself, that's sort of an area that I found, as a contractor, has been quite a useful kind of service, to offer, organizations who are developing, maybe who don't want to have that resource full time.
Yeah, and we definitely see that a little bit at Raygun. We have so many different SDKs to support. Oftentimes, you want to make sure that it's a great experience for the developer, and therefore, if you're building something without really being deep into that tech, you're unlikely to build it in a idiomatically succinct way for that platform. So we quite often will find third-party folks that are really deep into an ecosystem that we're not super strong in, and say, help us solve this, which was how we got to the bottom of that. The sort of altered Android firmware back in the day. I don't know that we would have figured that out necessarily without that sort of specialist help that was out there. Now,
absolutely.
Obviously, you're a fan of Raygun, which is cool. But what are some of the tools around the ecosystem that you kind of do rely on to help deliver this? There's obviously, we've talked about the building blocks of actually building an app, but there's so much more these days. Are there any sort of services or vendors or capabilities or things that you think people should be aware of that you personally rate and find helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe if I can add two parts to this. So one, talking a little bit about general technologies, but two, what methods and approaches can ease, for instance, migrating to Maui from say a Xamarin app. But I think in the general .NET world, there's a lot of change in design practice and design languages, and I think becoming well acquainted with the available tools is really important. Now, one of those tools that really has transformed not just mobile development but desktop development, even reaching into web development now, is reactive programming. So the system reactive project has been around for a while. I think now it's been adopted by the .NET Foundation. And then, of course, that paradigm has also found its way, I think, as we were talking a little bit about Swift UI, Kotlin multi-platform, again, based around these principles of reactive programming. Now, in the Xamarin world, in the Maui world, there is a longer established project, and again, not Xamarin and Maui specific, but it's a UI framework project, is reactive UI. And I've been able to implement that in a number of projects over the years, and really have seen a lot of benefit from that. Working with functional level programming completely changes the way you develop. When you start imagining events as like streams of data that you can manipulate and operate upon, you can even do really interesting things, like you can assert the state of the data at different points in time. And it kind of sounds really nerdy stuff, but just an example: if you have maybe behaviors that are time-based, and you were traditionally trying to write unit tests for them, those unit tests would have to run the length of whatever the time-based operation is in order to accurately, assert that it's working. With reactive programming, you can actually inject and mock time, which is a really interesting concept. But you can literally inject a scheduler into your unit test and wind it forward and backwards, and then, for instance, assert the state of that stream at different points in time. So when you're dealing with, something as simple as maybe debouncing a button on a login screen, or dealing with some kind of throttling operation, those kind of paradigms make a big difference. I think as well.
That sounds super handy. Just again, years of experience and the number of times when anything involves time.
Absolutely
does sound super helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. Even really just looking at things from a different point of view. I think probably for a lot of developers, maybe depending on how long they've been around, they may have come from the WinForms era, the VB.NET era, where everything is event driven. JavaScript, early JavaScript, ECMA, again, very event driven. But when you start viewing events as observable streams, that transforms how you approach development. So again, really useful technology. I think another one, personally, on different projects, has just been adopting good tooling that aids writing good unit tests, because at the end of the day, being able to guarantee the quality of an application and ensure that quality is maintained and doesn't regress, you need to be able to write good tests. But often developers, they might kind of think, it's going to be too time consuming, I don't want to do it, or it's just too hard, I don't know how I'm going to write a test for this code. I think really sitting back and getting a good look at how you're actually writing software, getting back to the basics of what good software is, really important skill. And I think as well, one of the things I have found working on, especially more recently, migrating from Xamarin to Maui, has been for applications that kind of did things by the book, that use the framework well. The transition, I'm not going to say it's seamless, but it's pretty good.
Right.
If you didn't do things by the book, well, it beats you over the head with a very big stick. And I think it really speaks to to just getting those basics right in your applications.
I think, yeah, I definitely support what you're saying there around it's almost the fundamentals of good software. And we could have a whole nother session on this, but I feel like in the very early 2000s, there was a lot of discussion around design patterns, how we actually hang software together. And I feel like while they haven't gone away, I don't know whether it was simply the demand got so damn high in the industry that we were kind of rushing people through, but and that's not to put any blame on the people either, or whether we were sort of turning projects so quickly that these discussions sort of seem to stop happening. And, again, might be touching back on the earlier point of feeling like a couple of old men here, but it really is the computer science of the craft, and going back to that understanding, if I do this, the bit changes over here, and how does that loop all hang together? It is really just a large puzzle to be solved, which makes it so much fun. We are nearing the end time here. I haven't been chased by Maddie yet, so that's good. I was going to look a little bit more to the future here, and this we're going to talk mobile for a second, but obviously we do have the AI bits coming, and everybody has been drowned in AI over the last year. What's your kind of general world outlook around what's happening in AI and tech? According to Matthew.
Yeah, I think it's really, key to separate the sensationalism from real world applications. And I think for many people, they're looking at AI, they're thinking, is my job going to disappear, or is my app going to need to incorporate AI to stand up from the crowd? How can I leverage it? What are the right technologies I should use? Should I do processing on device? What framework should I do? Should I do it in the cloud? And then, of course, as well, from a legal point of view, there's all of the considerations of consent, data privacy, all of that sort of things, particularly in this part of the world, in the EU and the UK, with the likes of GDPR. It really is a fascinating point in time. And I know that's something as well recently Raygun has enjoyed some experience working with.
That's true. Yeah, we added our AI error resolution capabilities, helping developers understand what could be the cause of faults and being able to chat away. What's interesting about that actually is, and it wouldn't be immediately obvious to anybody on that comes to the site, is we do get quite a few people reach out from time to time that aren't necessarily software developers. So they may own a marketing site, they may own a system that they know is broken, and they don't necessarily have the skills themselves to fix it. They just know that they own this thing that doesn't work. And that's something that I am really excited about, seeing the potential of that type of feature, because it's lowering that bar. It's sort of saying, hey, if this happened to be, say, a configuration problem, that person could probably go and fix that bug without being a coder. And so I do think that some of those things are great for democratizing access to systems. To your point about the job sort of impact side, I think that's a little further off overall, but it is certainly interesting. I've seen a few people sort of saying we really are living in some of the most interesting times where, you kind of think we didn't really have aircraft 150 years ago, and we have serious chats about life on Mars and machines doing all the work for us. It's a hell of a leap.
Absolutely. And I think it's really a time where there's a lot of technologies emerging, and I think everyone's sort of asking the question, well, how am I going to use this in my product? How am I going to use it in my business? And I think those use cases are still not fully fleshed out yet, for sure.
Yeah, I genuinely thought we would see a few more highly practical, probably call them sort of B2B type things. But yeah, so far it seems to be mostly digital girlfriends and other problematic categories showing up. But yeah, I think the on-device stuff is going to be super interesting. I know Microsoft with actually we have a question coming up on this, but around .NET 9, what are we going to do around AI with this? We've been having a look at the technologies around things like semantic kernel to help us be able to access and use some of these models and whatnot. So we do have a question that's come through here, so I'll ask it out loud for you. So Microsoft has started releasing videos in the lead up to .NET 9. Is there anything in particular you're looking forward to there related to MAUI, Matthew?
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously MAUI has been benefiting a lot from the language and runtime enhancements as it's moved from .NET 6, where it was kind of an early release, to .NET 7 to .NET 8. So obviously, as things move ahead, it's benefiting a lot. So out of the box, again, I think in .NET 9, Microsoft are talking about another generation of performance enhancements. So being able to benefit from that in terms of things like startup performance, latency, inflating views, all of that is going to benefit the framework under the hood. But I think specifically with .NET 9, I think Microsoft announced in preview the ability to be able to break out some of the assets that are used in the application to manage that more efficiently. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing how those enhancements pan out. But I will say already in .NET 8, there has been a real shift forward from the .NET 7 version of MAUI. So already there's a lot of goodies under the hood. It's
something I definitely find somewhat challenging. The Microsoft release cadence, an annual one, it is quite the treadmill. Credit to them for being able to keep all of that up. But yes, on the plus side, when there are deficiencies, you kind of go, oh, hey, it's not that long until sadly not that long. The years do fly by. But yes. Hey, Matthew, I would like to just extend a real thank you for spending some time with us today, talking about your mobile journey, a little bit about the Xamarin and the MAUI side of the world. Is there anything you'd like to cover off on before we wrap up today?
Yeah, no, good question. No, it's been awesome, JD, catching up. I guess just speaking to one point, specifically on migrating from Xamarin to MAUI, lessons learned to date. Just a couple of interesting things I just wanted to share. For many folks, they're really been probably asking the question, well, how do we make it an easier journey on that migration? And obviously, Microsoft have got some great documentation on that. But for a lot of organizations right now, they may still have a production app running currently with Xamarin Forms, and there's a lot of things you can do right now to get your app into a state where it's going to be a lot easier to migrate to MAUI. And on some of the projects that I've been working with, even things like getting ahead of some of the language improvements in .NET 8. So, with Xamarin, you have access to modern language features and C# 9. Getting the code base into that point now, that really eases things for migrating. And also as well, looking at the differences between the way Xamarin and MAUI work, things like some of the layout differences, you can handle a lot of that by writing almost like a compatibility layer that sits in your current app, and you can actually move that over to MAUI. And it just means things like if you're merging possibly between two different code bases, you can keep them in sync more easily. So there's a lot of tips and tricks on that. Maybe something for another day, perhaps.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think we should probably put an associated blog post up on some of those tips and tricks that kind of outline what they are and helping people move forward. It is always, I have to say, I've had times where I've built on stacks where they've had fairly significant changes, and it can be quite frustrating, when they do occur. But certainly, taking the lead from others who have done those transitions and learnt the hard way. I mean, our last big one was really actually moving all of the Raygun stuff from full framework onto .NET Core. That took a lot of work, even though in theory it looks a lot more similar, I would assume, than kind of going from the Xamarin to MAUI world. It is a lot of work doing those migrations, but the benefits do stack up, as you say. Access to the latest technology, and especially the work that the Microsoft team put into performance is always appreciated, especially by couple of older folks who like their fast assembly code.
Well,
Hey,
you never know. It might be the next evolution.
Yep. Now, we do have some future Founder and Friends episodes coming up as well. It's been a little bit more quiet over the last few months. I've been doing a wee bit of traveling. We've recorded a bunch of these while visiting some customers as well. And so they'll be coming out live over the next month or two as well. So it's been great to be back and doing a live session here with you, Matthew. I really appreciate it. I know we didn't talk too heavily about the specifics of the work you're doing that involves Raygun, other than to say we have really appreciated all your feedback and assistance in helping ensure that our Maui support is top notch. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been great working with the team.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. And thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of your day.